shaped history with this causation. We're going to pound on the doors of history again in this podcast, a recording, and we're going to look at the founding of the nation of Israel, Iran, and Afghanistan. And these would be the three main focuses for this podcast. And again, we're looking back at 9/11. This is the impetus. This is the effect. We're going to the causes, and we talked about these dates. And you can see I did add one date, and we're going to talk about that here momentarily. Now, if we look here, we're going to start with date number one. Okay, we got to be conscious of these dates, how they shape history, how they play a role in 9/11. And again, we as fans of history, students of history, we can construct arguments, we can find relations from past events to the present day. So the moral of the story is history does matter. We remind ourselves, and again, make sure we're conscious of the fact that history is dictated by the choices and the consequences of those choices by the individual, these leaders, and the people following them. Now, we must start, before we get into the first date, 1914, with understanding this concept of imperialism. It's really going to hit its peak here in the early 1900s. We're going to see imperialism, which is this expansion, this idea of expanding power, expanding influence in other regions, controlling these regions for resources, for military operations, for trade. We're going to look at industrialization, how it plays a role in imperialism later in the year. But if you look at this imperialism, you guys can see it kind of peaks here at the turn of the 20th century. And the colors on the map here kind of reinforce the fact of all the places that were under control or influence. And I think this map does a great job of reinforcing how these countries primarily, looking at here in Europe, and you see Japan over here as well as an imperial power, these are the countries expanding, are going to have a lot of influence throughout the world. And we can see that these countries, this new imperialism, this new age, where people are conquering these countries and trying to keep them under control and influence, that this is going to play a role in an upcoming conflict. Now, the biggest imperializer, the biggest bully of them all, was this country, England. And you can see with this guy's top hat, this illustration here, top hat, this is an industrialized country. A top hat represents power. It symbolizes power. And you can see England is controlling as much as it can. At its height, England will control roughly a third of the planet, a third of the planet's population. And you can see one of the countries they control over here is India, which we know has a lot of people. So, if we look here in the map here, you can see Great Britain in the green. You can see its influence. It is omnipotent, omnipresent throughout the world. Now, with this imperialism, we must understand, it's going to lead to competition. These countries all want to be the strongest. Germany does not want to see England become too powerful because then it may be a threat to them. France doesn't want to see Germany become too powerful because it may see a threat to themselves. So we see these countries competing for resources, and you can see this political cartoon illustrating in the scramble for Africa, where European countries are scrambling for Africa's resources. In the meantime, you can see down towards the bottom here, there's going to be conflict over these resources, and there's going to be a war. Now, the first war breaks out, okay, as a result of an assassination in 1914. It's the first date, 6/28. If you look at the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie, in the city of Sarajevo, which was part of an empire. Now, if we look at this time, there were multiple empires throughout the world. You had the Russian Empire, you had the German Empire, you had the British Empire, you had the French Empire, you had the German Empire, Ottoman Empire, and this one here is the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And we can see that these countries here are under control by Austria-Hungary. And one of the people there, Gabriel Princip, the guy on the right over here, he was a strong nationalist which wanted control. He wanted to have self-determination. He wanted his country of Serbia to be free from Austria-Hungary. So as a result, again, we'll get more depth to this, he's going to be one of the assassins, and he's going to assassinate the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which is going to trigger World War I. Now, looking at cause and effect, World War I is going to take a toll on all combatants. We're going to look at how bad and brutal this war is in due time, but it's going to be that kind of first domino. So we can make the argument that Gabriel Princip, the cause and consequence, choice and consequence, this causation, helps trigger, change the world, this individual right here, with his actions. Now, one of the empires during World War I that jumped in, and unfortunately for its sake, the Ottoman Empire is going to side with Germany and Austria-Hungary. Now, the problem with Ottoman Empire. It was known as the sick man of Europe. Turkey's the main country, which is located. Part of it is in Europe, and it was sick man. It was considered a sick man of Europe because it was backwards compared to many of the Western European powers. It wasn't as technologically advanced. It wasn't militarily advanced, and it's going to fall prey, and it's going to lose World War I. As a result, okay, it's going to be broken up. Empires, when they go to war and they lose, oftentimes they lose territory, and we will see as a result of the time period of the world shifting, our energy resource shifting from using coal as a main source of energy to using oil. And unfortunately for the Ottoman Empire, or you could say fortunately for the Ottoman Empire, but fortunately for the British and French, the Ottoman Empire had a lot of oil. This is located in the Middle East. We know the Middle East is synonymous with oil, especially Saudi Arabia and Iran. So what do France and Britain do? They sit down, Sykes and Picot, which becomes known as the Sykes-Picot Accord on 5/19/1916. It's a secret agreement that they're going to divide up the Middle East. They're going to divide up the Ottoman Empire, parts of it, and they're going to influence or directly control these areas. And as a result, it's going to just put lines in these countries. It's going to create these countries. And we need to understand the Middle East was a place, or is a place, that identifies more by its religion and ethnicity, ethnic groups, rather than seen as a nation. Being part of a nation is not something they're used to. So they're going to just draw these lines in. They're going to give power to certain groups, which is going to abuse that power, and they're going to attack other groups. So we see the Middle East, even to this day, there's a lot of conflict around these ethnicities. The Kurds fighting for national sovereignty. But we see that this is France and Great Britain are going to kind of create the Middle East as we know it today. As a result of Ottoman Empire losing World War I. As a result of this imperialism. Now, again, looking at the doors of history, World War I has a catastrophic effect on the losers of World War I, even the winners as well, but especially the losers. The biggest loser of World War I wasn't the Ottoman Empire by many regards, but was Germany. And as a result of this Treaty of Versailles, which we'll talk about, as a result of the Treaty of Versailles, you're going to see that the economy is going to take a hit in Germany. And there's going to be a period known as hyperinflation, where they're just printing so much money that even children can play with it. You can see that illustrated here in this picture. Kind of captures the economic situation in Germany at the time, that money is not worth anything. All this money right here may have been able to buy a loaf of bread at the time in Germany. This is the hyperinflation, and the paper is just not worth anything because they print too much of it. So as a result, the German people in the late 1920s, early 1930s are looking for change, looking for something to kind of stimulate them, their economy, get them back to work, because they're suffering during the Great Depression as bad as anybody, more than anybody, with 33% of their population unemployed, which means 1 out of every 3 persons in Germany was unemployed. So as a result, they're looking for change. One guy in a political party is going to offer that change, and the German people are going to rally behind him eventually. That man is going to take power, Adolf Hitler, in January 30th, 1933. He'll become Chancellor, which is the second in command of Germany. And in due time, he's going to take all the power, and he's going to establish a dictatorship. Now, so as a result, we must look at this chain reaction here. Without World War I, there's no Adolf Hitler. Without Adolf Hitler, okay, and the Nazi Party, there aren't the people like this. Here's Adolf Eichmann, one of his right-hand men, who is responsible for carrying out the Holocaust. Without World War I, there's no Hitler. Without Hitler, this guy here, Adolf Eichmann, doesn't have the job of exterminating Jews and communists and gypsies and all these people. So we see the Nazis are going to take power thanks to World War I and its effects on the German Empire. Adolf Eichmann, as I mentioned, will carry out the Holocaust. He will convince Jews and others to climb on these trains. He will convince Jews and others to go to these concentration camps, many of them death camps, where they will be poison gassed in these gas chambers. And we will see these people here, didn't matter age, didn't matter gender, rounded up in either forced labor or, like as I mentioned, sadly exterminated. Very, very sad part in history of the Holocaust. Looking at the genocide, which again, you need to make sure you know what the word genocide means, and we'll have to explore that. But this genocide on these people, and we have these living memorials, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or Israel itself, but we see these people here. These are the people that were captured and died as a result of this Holocaust. And again, we'll look at videos of that. Now, as a result of the Holocaust, we must understand that these Jews were not just rounded up in Germany. They were rounded up throughout Europe, and they were sent to these places. It was very organized, this Holocaust, and organizing these people to get them to these places, these concentration camps or death camps. And what the Jews realized is kind of goes with, makes me think of Abraham Lincoln's quote, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." What the Jews realize is they're spread out throughout Europe, and if you're spread out, you're not together, you're not unified, you're an easy target. You can pick yourself off. They can pick you off. So what they want is just, they kind of revive this Zionist movement, which is this really strong push and urge to create a country in a land called Palestine. It's the Holy Land where Judaism was founded, and many Jews realized following World War II and the Holocaust, and all these countries turned their backs on these Jews, including France, including Romania and Hungary, and even Russia, and even America, for that matter, that if these people aren't going to protect us, we got to protect ourselves. So as a result, we will see a strong urge for Jews to migrate back to Palestine. And this is going to take place. This is going to be right here, located. And you can see here, this is just a zoom in of it. Now, the problem with Israel, and I guess we need to make sure we understand, ironically enough, Hitler tried to exterminate the Jews. He tried to kill them all off. But instead, he ends up getting them their own country. Because we must understand, context is king. In 1945, 46, all these accounts come out of what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust. Talk about the concentration camps, the gas chambers, the torture, the executions, the babies, the women, the elderly, the men, these people, forced labor camps. There's all this evidence of this. So that the world community feels sympathy for what the Jews have gone through. So because of Hitler's actions, he's going to help create the country of Israel, because come 1946, 47, 48, Israel's going to be founded. 1948 is going to be its own country. Now, we can see, though, this is going to be a problem. Because if you're going to give a group of people a country, give them land, you're going to take it from somebody else. And what we see happen here is, we can see in 1946, you can see the Palestinians control most of it. These are Arab, primarily Muslims. And then you can see by 1947, it's about 50-50 split. But then from 1949 to 1967, you can see Israel dominates a majority of the country. And we can see the Gaza Strip right here. And this is known as the West Bank over here. But then you see by 2000, you can see Israel has control of roughly 90% of the country. And these people are segregated, they're isolated, and Palestine is not recognized by Israel as being its own country, which then doesn't allow them the same protections and rights as countries. Now, Israel is very organized, it's very unified. It is a very strong, powerful country today. And as you see, though, it's surrounded by enemies. Many Muslim extremists, radicals, want them out. One of the organizations I thought was interesting, though, just to make sure we see the cause and effect, the intelligence agency in Israel is known as Mossad. And these guys are responsible for protecting Israel. It's their CIA equivalent. One of the things they do in the early 60s is actually, at Adolf Eichmann, I talked about earlier, that organized the Holocaust. They're going to track him down in Argentina and actually kidnap him and bring him back to Israel and put him on trial for his atrocities committed during World War II with the genocide. And there's a movie coming out. I thought it was just relevant to share that. So we see Israel, and we must understand Israel is going to have a strong ally in America. Now, again, we need to make sure we remind ourselves that Israel's not beloved by many of the radical Muslim community in that area. We can see back here, these are Muslim countries, and they see Palestinians being arguably mistreated by the Israelites, the Jews, and they see America backing them. And this makes America a target by some of these extremists in this region. Now, looking at Germany, I just want to give you a, I thought, fascinating story. Germany is known for having 2 Olympics. The first one being 1936, which was known as synonymous with the Nazis and Hitler, and also over here, Jesse Owens. And he's going to dominate that Olympics and kind of put a dark cloud over that whole argument of eugenics and the Germans being the master race. The other one was in 1972, and it took place in a city called Munich. This is the second of the 2 Olympics hosted by Germany. And again, we can see the fanning of the flames or the effects of the Jews in Israel becoming its own country, because Israel is going to send some representatives to Munich to participate in the Olympic Games 1972. And here you see is Munich in southern Germany. And Germans really want to kind of get over this whole Holocaust idea, this trying to have a more positive remembrance of them. They've moved on from this, so they make sure their police officers don't carry guns. They don't look militaristic at all. And this is going to play into a terrorist organization's hands. And they're actually going to execute and kill 11 members of the Jewish wrestling and weightlifting team. This is going to be a massacre at the Games. Unfortunately for Germany, they're remembered for this now too. The second Olympics that they were remembered for, and it was a tragedy. It was a world tragedy, definitely an Israeli tragedy for the events that happened at that time. And here are some pictures of some of the apartments, the dorm rooms that the Jews were staying in. And those who did survive, they tried to get a helicopter evac, and it's going to be grenaded. It's going to be blown